Welcome to another edition of Anglican Unscripted. This is episode 905. I'm Kevin Kallsen.
I'm George Conger. Today is March 11th, 2025.
All right, welcome to another episode of Anglican Unscripted. We're glad you could be here. This is episode 905. That means we've done 904 previous episodes. That's just beyond reason. But we're glad you joined us for most of those. We started with an audience of 300. We're up to an audience per show, or 5, 6, 7,000. We really appreciate that. Is that the viral YouTube video of the era? No, there's better stuff out there. If you're really bored, you watch Mr. Beast. If you want some good entertainment on tech news, you watch Marquez. But if you want to know Anglican nerdy news, this is it. This is it. There's no better show to sit down and watch two guys talk about politics, religion, and just fun stuff off the bat. And that's what we do. Before we get too far into this episode, please like us on Facebook and YouTube. That helps with the algorithms. You're not lying. It's just free advertising. You're telling the Facebook and YouTube that this is a show worth distributing to other Anglicans and Christians around the world, and we do appreciate that. If you're not subscribed yet, please subscribe. You click that red rectangle, up pops that little bell, you click the bell, and you are subscribed and should, in theory, receive all notifications when I upload a new show. If you've not gone to the comment section yet, I don't know what you're waiting for. There's just a lot going on out there. Did I save that screen? No, I didn't. Every episode has hundreds of comments. We really appreciate that. Nobody really took us to task last time, so dodged a bullet. Sometimes we don't dodge a bullet, but we really appreciate that. And if you've not shared this show with friends or family, what a great opportunity, then episode 905, to admit to people, okay, I watch Unscripted. Sorry, I do. I'm coming out of the unscripted closet. George, how you doing this week?
I'm doing great. I do have an audience in the studio this morning, and
yeah.
And I've had to take the one person and put her in my lap. We have inmates from the local jail working on the yard.
Oh, Kairos! You're doing a Kairos ministry?
No. That's from. No, these are people in the county jail who are about a month out from release, and so they get work release, and they make like 10 cents an hour. Plus a nice lunch, cutting grass and stuff. So they're men in orange and white striped jumpsuits. And therefore, I am not as attractive and all-encompassing. So I've had to put the ringleader of my little crew in my lap, and I will be petting her for the next hour so she doesn't start attacking through the window these strange men in orange.
We don't mind that. It's the snoring. If you could keep the little pooch from going like we hear frequently when the dogs are visiting, I think that the audience would appreciate that. All is well. If you can't tell, the nose is a little red. I went for a bike ride yesterday and I forgot to apply sunscreen. Something you do every time you go for a bike ride in Florida. I was just too excited to get out there on a 58-degree day, and I wore my helmet. Yes, Mom, sorry, but I forgot the sunscreen. Oh, boy, we got a whole bunch of news here we're going to cover.
Kevin, at least it's not blue. It's not frostbite. Sorry.
No, it was. Not now. Yeah, well, I wear sunglasses, as you can tell. You see the line for the glasses, and I look really odd. Okay, for a 60-year-old guy on a bicycle, I can sell it. Okay. All right, spandex is a little tight, and I still got the tummy on the front, but, I look the hipster bicycle. And the cool thing about people in their 60s who ride bikes and exercise frequently, they still think they could be a contender. They in their brain, I could do this, George. I could go ride the Tour de France. But let's move on to the news. Over in the UK, they have passed a bill or introduced a bill. Crime and Policing Bill has been introduced February 25th in the UK Parliament. It will mandate reporting of child abuse. Full stop. Okay. We've had that since the 80s and 90s here in America. I don't know why they're so far behind, but they now have a duty to report child sex offenses, and it will be codified into law. What took so long?
Maybe because the child sex abuse scandal broke in the United States 25 years ago.
Roman Catholic Church?
And each state adopted its laws, some sooner, some later. In my memory, I've never had discretion on child abuse.
Right.
In other words, if I suspected it, it wasn't a case of, well, I talked to the parents or this or that. I just went straight to the bishop, straight to the church insurance. If it were somebody in my congregation, straight to the bishop, straight to the church insurance, and straight to the police. I didn't stop, I didn't pass go. I didn't collect $25. I just went. Mm-hmm. Now, the new proposed law will say that if you are in a regulated activity involving children, coaching, teaching, scouting, basically anything where you work with children, you have a duty to report suspected child abuse. You may not, on your own, seek to determine whether that abuse is right or not. You have to report it. Mm-hmm. And here's the kicker. If you prevent somebody, the clause 52 of the bill, I'm going to read now, creates a new crime of the offense of preventing or deterring a person from complying with their reporting duty. So what does this have to do? This is the Smythe case, and this is Justin Welby.
Yes.
Justin Welby and Joe Bailey Wells and Stephen Conway, the Bishop of Ely, did not report abuse to the police. We'll take care of it.
And including stuff that was reported to them, not just their first person understanding, but anybody who had a third person report and report to them, they would not further take it to the police.
Yeah, they part of the hit against Welby and Company was the story. We'll take care of it. The church has its processes. Well, this removes the processes from the church. A minister who suspects something, no longer his first call is to the diocese or to the safeguarding officer. It's to the local police authority. Some will shout and scream and yell that this is removing rightful authority to the church, but in the 20 plus 25 years that I've been aware of this in the Episcopal Church, it's never been a problem. And it has basically, when you no longer have discretion on this matter, it makes it all the better. I've had 2 cases in my parish in the last 10, 12 years where somebody complained to me about they suspected abuse. Both cases, as soon as I finished talking to them, one guy I knew was our parish nut job. And I wrote down what he said. And I called the bishop, and I called the insurance company, and I called the sheriff's department, and they sent Child and Protective Services around, and I never heard anything about it again, which meant that it was, as I suspected, he was a nut job. And the second case, again, was somebody who was hyper, there were 2 false cases. It caused no grief, caused no trouble, caused no anything, because there was not any sense that the buck stopped with George and he was the decision maker, and he was either protecting somebody he liked or he was punishing somebody he disliked. Lest the majesty of the law take its course.
Mm-hmm. Now, some churches and denominations have what's called the seal of confession. Mm-hmm. What does this law do in terms of the seal of confession?
We don't know, because I don't know how far this has been tested. But I can tell you that this confession is a sacrament in the Roman Catholic Church. It's a lesser sacrament in the Anglican Church, the Episcopal Church. But I was taught 20 plus years ago, if someone wanted to confess to me a crime like this, I had to tell them at the outset this was something I would have to report to the police.
Sure.
If they were to tell me this. It is not like the movies. I know there are some romantics who imagine that the priest, you can fly to him and off the handle confess to having murdered your wife and he'll keep it. That's an Alfred Hitchcock movie. We're not in that culture anymore. usually by the time somebody comes to you to confess their sins, you already know what they're going to come to talk to you about. So we've not seen it. Now, there are some states in the United States where the seal of confession is still kept in place. Other places where it's not allowed, I believe. Mm-hmm. But, it really doesn't come up that often. It really doesn't come up that often. Now, if, for instance, when I do Kairos weekends where I go into the prison, the inmates are, I tell them, do not confess. Don't tell me that you're going to kill yourself or you're going to kill somebody else.
Your cellmate.
Yeah. Because even before we start talking, I'm going to have to tell the warden or the CO, the correctional officer. I mean, there's certain parameters that you have. And you just have to live with it. In other words, for instance, when I go into prison to bring Holy Communion, I bring wafers and grape juice because you can't bring alcohol into prison. Okay? Now, is that real communion, or can I assuage my conscience by saying, well, that's communion in one kind plus a little grape juice to wash it down with? The hard cases, bad cases make bad law.
Yep.
And so I don't really think that confession is going to be that big of an issue because, the Catholics are constantly complaining that people don't go to confession anymore. And child molesters are probably at the end of the line to make confession. They're not at the front of the line to make it. So I don't really think this will be a practical issue.
It's just one of those questions that comes up for the unscripted audience. We serve a vast Orthodox, Roman Catholic, Anglican, Methodist, Lutheran, even some Mormons watch us. Hi, audience. And well, what about the seal? I thought I couldn't tell anybody. Well, no, it doesn't quite work that way. I had a Roman Catholic priest friend back in the early 90s, and we had this discussion. And he says, Kevin, no matter what is felony crime is confessed to me, part of the penance is taking this forward, the two of us, to the police. Part of the absolving of the sin is to take this to the authorities, and he had done that like once or twice with the person who confessed.
This actually was a legal case in the 19th century in England, mm-hmm. where a woman confessed to a priest that she had become one of the first nuns, Anglican nuns. Mm-hmm. And she confessed to a priest, her confessor, that she had committed a terrible crime, I think, infanticide or something. Oh, wow. And it was later discovered, in other words, that she had smothered a baby or something like that. And it was later discovered by a third party, and the priest was brought to trial. And the case revolved around the fact that the Church of England did not hold that the seal of confession was inviolable under law. And so, and that was the era when there were some Anglo-Catholic priests who were jailed over Holy Communion, where the candles were in the altar, and things like that, when things were a little wild and crazy. But this was a minor issue as well, that the Church of England did not recognize the inviolable seal of confession as regards to these sorts of things. So the courts held, both civil law and church law, that the priest had to report. So maybe this is a cleaning up, if you will, and maybe the priests have always had to report, but the church has, in the wake of the Oxford movement and things like that, when it moved a little higher up on the scale of things, and churchmanship forgot that. But now the government's pulling them back down and saying, sorry. But, and let's say in some, I won't say cults, but some sects like Jehovah's Witnesses or where they don't share anything with anybody outside. This applies to them as well. If they are aware, or Scientology, if you've seen some of these TV shows about the hard abuse that goes on in Scientology.
Oh, sure. Scientology, polygamy, all that, absolutely.
if you're aware of it, you have no legal protection now to claim that my faith says I can only tell Tom Cruise. I can't tell the police.
Well,
I'm
it's
sorry,
interesting.
Tom, I didn't mean that.
No, okay. Well, it's interesting because here the government is bailing out the church because the church couldn't bring itself to do this. And the church has safeguarding rules. Oh, we are the best safeguarders in all of Europe. Well, clearly, if you've watched Unscripted for the last 6-7 years, you're not. And here's the government of the UK saying, no, you're not even the top 10 safeguarding institutions.
Yeah,
and we're here to help.
The last month's General Synod, they punted the ball. They were going to hand it over to completely independent authority. They're not. And the government's going to take it out of their hands eventually, and basically say, look, you've had your chance to set your own house in order. We're going to have to do it for you. And where does the fault lie? It lies in the bishops. It lies in the leadership, lay and clergy, who have sought to protect their own empires and kingdoms, and where power is the issue that is most important. Not truth, not faith, not justice, not righteousness, not holiness, but power. You see this in the behavior of Stephen Cottrell. Yes, Kevin, somebody in our comments did give us an enunciation chart. Cottrell.
Won't help.
This is the issue with Stephen Cottrell, where his authority, his personal authority, not his office's authority, but his personal authority is sacrosanct. He can't be touched. And the church is going to continue to collapse if that's the altar where they're worshiping.
Yeah. Absolutely insane. Now, we watch this. Okay. In the last 28 days, 46% of the Anglican Unscripted audience is from the UK. Clearly, there's no place in the UK to go and get their Anglican news. And so they come here to watch it. And we appreciate that very much. And it's kind of like we do at least 3 or 4, sometimes 5 stories on what happens overseas across the pond in the mother church every week. And story number 2 is no different. You titled this Cathedral Chaos. Winchester Cathedral reveals lead review. Start that over. Cottrell. Winchester Cathedral review leads to the dean's resignation for bullying. Now, bullying is something very new to the Church of England, so we'll have to explore this story a little further. But we're going to talk about a couple different cathedrals and their bullying issues, George.
These are all unrelated stories. Winchester, Bangor, Western Newfoundland. 3 cathedral stories. Catherine Ogle, the dean of Winchester Cathedral, has had a rocky ride as dean there. Winchester was known for its choral music, its choir, its musical heritage. You can go buy really wonderfully produced CDs of their performances. I say performances, but it's worship. And there began an internal fight with the director of the cathedral, who had been there for a long time and really was worth the money they were paying him. And first little changes like, we have to have girls in the boys choir. Okay, they did that. And then, we need to have music that will be more, can't we have George Michael and Mariah Carey tunes this Christmas?
God have faith. Yeah, sure, I get it. Yeah.
Well, this led to the music directors and the choir master resigning. And this was a big earthquake in the classical music world in England and in the United States. And a visitation was requested. And a visitation is where the bishop does an inspection, an outside inspection. And the bishop's visitation was conducted by an independent party. We have not seen what it said, but we had heard stories about Catherine Ogles being a bully and being a real SOB and this and that, unpastoral, demanding, chip on her shoulder type of person. And the results of the visitation were released, only a summary, and along with it was the dean's letter. She was resigning.
Oh,
so
well, that's weird. So at the same time, no correlation, causation. Just
she was not done dirty by the published review.
Right.
And the interim dean, who had been a sub-dean, subsequently put out a letter saying, I apologize for not standing up against any of you, helping any of you who were bullied. So we sort of put two and two together and say Catherine Ogle was canned. Now, thank goodness that there's that independent review process. But the problem, I think, here has been a lack of transparency from the beginning. And also, there's been a party spirit. When women went into the Church of England, into the ministry, I can remember when it passed and all this and that, one of the arguments we heard was that women in leadership positions will change the culture. We'll no longer have bullying. We'll have a premium on safeguarding. Mm-hmm. The experiences of oppressed women will rise up in the leaders that we're raising up, and we'll make this a better, brighter, cleaner church.
They will have homogeny before homogeny was a thing. Absolutely.
Well, what's happened is that if we look at Anne Dyer up in Scotland, if we look at Catherine Jefferts Schori in the United States, we look at Catherine Ogle in Winchester, women can be just as much of an SOB as a man can. So in other words, this, great tidal wave of change, trust women. This is an early form of DEI. Now, diversity, equity, inclusion, where if we put categories above individuals, the system falls apart. Now, there are wonderful women clergy. There are dreadful women clergy. There are wonderful male clergy. There are dreadful male clergy. But if we start saying only men can be good clergy, or only women can be good clergy, or women are going to lead the way, that person doesn't live in reality.
Well, I want to back you up a little. You said that Catherine and these female bishops can get away with as much as a man can. I would say because we made that excuse that they're holier than you would suspect, that they get away with more. There's no way a male clergy in the mid-2000s could have, a presiding bishop male of the Episcopal Church could have deposed 700 clergy.
No.
Not a chance. There's no way that this bullying can exist. This bullying can exist over in cathedrals, unless you agree that women just do a better job, and you don't understand the point of bullying. Bullying here is to make the church a better place.
Well, there are some bully deans still out there. It's not that. But I think this woman's bad behavior was allowed to go along farther because she's in that first.
Wake that dog up. Wake him up.
Oh, she's just. Let me just settle her down.
Okay.
She had fallen asleep. That first generation of women leaders had to put up with more, but they also got away with more, if you will.
Sure. Don't disagree. All right, let's move on to our third news story. There's a massacre in Alawites in West. No, you got more bishops here. I see the list of bishops. I completely passed over them. Bangor Cathedral review results not released. Safeguarding problem. Dean of Western Newfoundland fired. Let's talk a little bit about those stories.
Bangor, which is the sea cathedral for Andrew John, who's the primate of Wales, has been without a dean, and this is a case of pure silence from the authorities. The only way we know anything is that somebody's been leaking papers to the National, the Welsh newspaper, and somebody in a position of authority was doing sexual harassment, and a review was conducted, an outside investigation. But in this case, the primate has not released it, not give us a summary. We don't know anything. The only thing we know is that they also brought in 318, or I get their name wrong, the independent safeguarding people that have been active in the Church of England. And here, one of the problems with the church in Wales was that the head of the finances of the cathedral was also head of finances of the diocese. So you had one guy basically controlling everything, and now he's gone. Was he the pervert? We don't know. Nobody knows. Maybe this is totally unrelated. But the problem is that the refusal to be honest about what's going on has further damaged a church that I would say is in terminal decline. You can't get much worse off than the church in Wales as an institution and as a denomination.
Agreed. And let's see, you got the Dean of Western Newfoundland was fired. Covered that.
Yeah, this is again a story where we're not told the story. The dean, a woman, in Western Newfoundland, the cathedral's in Corner Brook. In January, the bishop appeared one Sunday and said the dean's been fired. And the archdeacon is going to be your interim. And that was it. No reasons, no questions. And so for Canadians, this was quite a shock because, they liked the stereotype is they like things in good order and everything. This led to protests of the congregation. All of the cathedral chapter or their vestry resigned en masse. They contacted the Canadian CBC and then local newspapers. And now charges have been laid against the Bishop of Western Newfoundland by the congregation and by the since fired dean, because not only did he fire her, he lifted her license to officiate, meaning she couldn't get another job. And she's not been publicly accused of anything. So here is, again, all of these stories are unrelated, but but essentially what they all are having common, in other words, the Catherine Ogle has nothing to do with Newfoundland, right. But they're all related in the sense of there's power being exercised behind closed doors that nobody can see, check, understand. And this is the sort of stuff that destroys churches.
It does. This is what, exactly what's talked about in Titus. You have to be above reproach. If you're not being transparent about these things, you're not above reproach. And there's no transparency in what's going on behind the scenes. Oh, we don't want to bring up the good name of so-and-so and run them through the press. We just want to quietly let them go. It doesn't work like that in the Christian church. In the Christian church, we have to know what's going on and why things are done, up to a point, obviously, if we're involving issues with child molestation or something like that. You want to take this a different route to protect the victims. But I don't think, maybe I'm wrong, that we're protecting victims here by causing bullying deans to resign. And I don't know. Do not know. Now I'm going to move on to the third story, George. We all set? You ready to go? No more Bishop news? Okay, good. Massacre of Alawites in western Syria. If you've been on X and YouTube, you've seen these violent Islamic extremists in Syria who were under the leadership of Assad when he was in charge, going around and massacring and beating and making Christians crawl in the streets. And you're not going to see this on your BBC or your mainstream media here in America, but on Unscripted, we'll talk about it. Now, oh no, all the Christians in Syria are being massacred. No, most of them have left already. When Assad fell, we saw a great fleeing. When President Trump took office, even more fled. And this goes back to our point we made years ago when Osama bin Laden was in charge of Iraq, that totalitarians wield power enough to provide peace for all religions.
Saddam Hussein.
What did I say? Saddam bin Laden?
Osama bin Laden.
Saddam Hussein, a former totalitarian of Iraq, was able to keep the peace.
Several levels to this story. One is, and I told you so from George, who I said, don't kick the anthill. We had George W. Bush, saying that basically we can turn Iraq into a Vermont town hall place where everybody respects and is nice to each other. And the net result was the near destruction of the Christian and other minorities, because Saddam Hussein was a murderer, horrible human being, but he kept the place stable. If you were his enemy, he was horrible.
Sure.
And the net result has been the death of, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of millions of civilians in the civil wars and wars that have followed.
Kurds, you name it, yeah.
You know, the Obama administration and then the Biden administration wanted to get rid of Assad. Assad is a monster. No question about that. Assad is a horrible human being. His father was worse. He had the support of the Russians to stay in power. However, in this totalitarian dictatorship, if you were a minority, a Christian, one of the various sects of Islam, a Druze, you could, so long as you didn't attract political opposition, as long as you were in political opposition, you could live and, you know, your life would be fine. Well, the U.S. government, the CIA, backed the people who have come to power. And they are essentially ISIS dressed up in new garb. And their leader will take off his turban and put on a suit when he meets with Western leaders and say, we're interested in democracy. But then what happens is his soldiers are going through Western Syria and murdering Alawites. Alawites are the religious minority. It's a form of Shiism that Assad drew his. Assad is an Alawite, and a lot of the army officers and the government. So this is now payback time. This is like after the Nazis are driven out of France, the collaborators are lined up against the wall and shot for being allies of the Germans. Well, this is payback time. So anybody associated with the old regime, the Islamists are murdering. And some of the more extreme ones are murdering Christians. There's a video going around of a Christian man being crucified. I don't know if it's true or not, but I wouldn't put it past the people there. But the problem here is sometimes it's best to leave well enough alone and pray for divine intervention rather than thinking we can send in the Marines or CIA money to fix any problem. The latest story is, as Kevin, as you said, there's a genocide of Alawites taking place right now in Western Syria. And who's the savior? It's the Russians. The Russians still have their naval base Latakia.
Right there. Yep.
And they have opened it up to Alawites and Christians fleeing the CIA-backed army that we put into power. What a world in which we live.
Yeah. I mean, right now we're living in some history book. This will 2025 and 2024 will be an asterisk. Take special note. But if you look back at the late 80s and 90s when Iraq invaded Kuwait and the world was like, oh, this cannot stand. And George Bush I put together Arnold Schwarzkopf and all these great military people to go and take him out. And we as proud Americans watched the U.S. Army completely decimate and bulldoze over Iraqi troops in order to free Kuwait from the struggles of an invasion. It was then determined by George W. that we don't need to have Saddam. Saddam is a problem, and we're going to take him out. And we were eventually able to, through war, go and take him out. And I think there's been a lot of trouble in the Middle East, because the Middle Eastern people do not know what democracy looks like. And to tell them you have free choice, they would rather give that choice to somebody else in order to live in peace. And
well, let's attract YouTube censors. The problem is Islam. The problem is Islam. There are some Islamic states that have enlightened rulers, and those are some of the Gulf Arab sheikdoms where prosperity has basically opened their eyes to the fact that they're happy to deal with the West and they don't want to deal with some of these nuts across the border.
Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
Turkey.
But
Egypt. You want to go through the list?
But what's happening is that Islam is moving en masse into Western Europe, and the dysfunction of European societies, which were always high trust societies, are falling apart because these parts of the world are not high trust places. When you put in, like in Ireland, Ireland's the laboratory where they are, settling 500-600 migrant men of military age, no women, in these little Irish villages with the same number of local Irish. And then they're offering jobs to some of these migrants to be police or Garda. You're basically planting plantations, seeds of your own nation state's destruction. You look at, I started visiting the UK in the early 70s as a child with my father, who had business there. And England was a clean place. London was a clean city. We would go up to Peterborough, to a factory there. And Peterborough was a respectable, neat, orderly place. Peterborough's imported a number of Somalis. And you would not say England is a clean, neat, respectable, orderly place anymore. The culture of, I put it as small, I don't know where this came from, but littering is now the national religion of, it's a small thing.
Yeah, it is a small thing.
You see this imported culture of people refusing to assimilate, of people who have been born in Britain, who say that, anyone who leaves Islam must be murdered, who's gone to British schools. This is the problem that you've imported. And you either have to do a French Algeria solution, which is pull all the French out of Algeria, and that's that. Or, as J.D. Vance says, Britain will be the first Islamic country with a bomb.
The biggest problem I have is, clearly they're making a mistake with their open immigration, open border policy, as we used to have here in America until January, because the biggest mistake they're making is not telling the truth of the results of that mistake. The crime has increased. Islamic, Shia, and Sunni crime has increased. And London is not the place it used to be. And whether it was the rape gangs or the violence and the inability to hold all sides equally accountable. The only people who are accountable right now in Europe and especially in England are the white males. You said what? That's offensive to our guest from Nigeria or Algeria. Name the country. You shall be detained and sentenced. How dare you offend them? We're English people. We don't offend anybody. And because they don't hold an equal level of accountability, this will bite them in the butt.
There's a two-tier legal system. Last week we talked about the sentencing guidelines where non-whites are to receive more lenient sentence than whites for the same crime. Also something as small as zoning. Victor Davis Hanson, the member of the Hoover Institution, he's a noted conservative commentator. He still lives on his family farm outside of Fresno, California. And in his county, the zoning is unequally forced. He will have, he had to electrify an outbuilding, and he had to spend more on permits and government inspections and having come out and all do this and that than the actual cost of the construction itself. Down the road, one of the property owners put in 5 or 6 mobile homes, and in each mobile home are like 15 Mexican workers with open defecation outside. Yeah. There's a
extension cords, not circuit plugins. Yeah.
Yeah. Running to the local power poles that, theft electricity, this and that. And Hanson said, well, why don't you, enforce the environmental zoning. These are zoned for farm with no resident. Why don't you enforce that? We can't because they're Mexican migrants, and we're not going to tangle with the gangs that are down there. Mm-hmm. Now, that's one of the things that Trump has promised to clean up, but that's one of the things that two-tier where a white middle-class man who is still a farmer, Davis is still a farmer, has to stand on, is judged on these standards, whereas non-white immigrants are judged on different standards. And he is policed, they are not. He has to pay taxes, they do not. If California actually cracked down on sales tax violations, it's claimed that their budget deficit would go away because the parallel economy is almost, in some areas, is bigger than the regular economy.
Now, the problem here in America is great. The problem over in Europe is greater. You have lost so much ground in your rights as a nation to this desire to, entertain, host. In the end, what is your excuse for turning your country over? I don't get it.
Well, in one sense, we in America are lucky because Hispanics assimilate.
Yes.
People from Mexico. And this is one of the big shockers for Democrats at the last election, that Donald Trump won his majority of Hispanic male voters. First generation U.S. citizens, he won a majority of Hispanic immigrants from Mexico, Guatemala, places like that. They're God-fearing, they work hard, and they want their families to get ahead, and half of them become Protestants.
And most of them are anti-illegal immigration.
And so that our illegal immigrants are a short-term problem until they, maybe 15% of the people in my congregation, my senior warden, my past junior warden, have Hispanic last names and would be considered of immigrant stock.
Sure.
But they don't view themselves, as a hyphenate. I'm Mexican American, I'm Cuban American. They view themselves as American. Just because their name is Diaz or Hernandez or Velasquez means just, somebody who has a Polish last name or an Italian last name. It's just part of the melting pot. Europe doesn't have that because the Muslims refuse, by and large, not universally, by and large, to assimilate and to become part of a new society.
Why do we talk so much? We try to get people to agree with us. Story number 4, the Vatican has decided to agree with the hosts of Anglican Unscripted, Kevin and George. Vatican Communications Chief rejects the EU plan to rearm the Ukraine, something that's been talked about so much the last 2 weeks. Dicastery. Dicastery. It's not spelled the way I would see that, but for communications chiefs,
just put an I in the end, a Y in the end.
Okay, good. For communications chief says no to $850 billion for arms, and urges the UK to work with Trump for negotiated What is happening to this world? So the Vatican says, listen, let's give peace a chance. Did I say that?
All we are saying.
Did I say that?
Peace a chance. Well, we cannot claim that the Vatican, because they issued their statement the afternoon after we recorded, but before we went to press.
Yeah.
But the EU has Macron and Starmer and Merz, the new German chancellor, have put together a plan, which the Italians have already rejected, to send $850 billion in aid to help continue the fight in Russia, against Russia. And the Vatican is saying, whoa, let's stop for a second. A peace is what we need right now. We don't need more deaths. We don't need more destruction. The Vatican basically, in their way, echo the arguments that George and Kevin and we did come up with these arguments, but there is a sense that this war is being driven by people who are out of touch with the death and destruction that is taking place. And that there was an article that I saw, it reprinted on the Gateway Pundit, where the UK foreign policy establishment is furious with Trump for reaching out to Putin, because the UK's foreign policy, ever since the War of the Roses, has been to have Europe at each other's throats. And so that's why Britain has been allied with the Spanish against the Spanish, with the French against the French, with the Germans against the Germans, with the Russians against the Russians, and are trying to settle things with the Russians upsets the British plan to have Europe and the Russians at each other's throat. This, whether it's true or not, I don't know, but the Vatican is basically going down the arguments that we've made, but probably in a more elegant and succinct way than we did.
Kevin, are you, and George, are you just pro-war? Are you anti-war? Are you pro-Trump or anti-Trump? I am pro-solution. Okay, and at this point, there is no way we can put enough money into the Ukraine to end the war, to have a victory. All we can do is fund, and you said that, fund the war. Your words were fund the war. And that cannot be the goal of any country, is to fund a war, or we'll have another 100-year war. The goal must always be to win a war. And I can't look back in the last 65, 70 years of American policy and find out that when we get into a war, the desire to win it isn't there. Look at Vietnam. We did not mind fighting the communists. We somehow decided that we would do a police action and not go to war. And I would not be opposed to a war against Russia after the Ukraine invasion if the goal was to defeat Russia. Okay.
Let's take it farther back, Kevin. Let's take it to Korea.
Oh, geez.
The clash between MacArthur and Truman.
Truman, yep.
MacArthur said, let's use the bomb, let's bring over Chiang Kai-shek, and let's settle this with the Chinese and the North Koreans once and for all. Mm-hmm. And Truman said, no, we don't need to do that. Let's find a way to keep the war hot but cold, but keep it going. The Truman Doctrine has been that way ever since. We did not seek to defeat Vietnam. We just sought to contain Vietnam. Mm-hmm. Or we did not seek to defeat radical Islam. We sought to contain it. We sought to defeat the person of Saddam Hussein, and then we sought to recreate America in Iraq, but we didn't really do anything to address the underlying issues that we were really fighting. So I would argue that American foreign policy, ever since the Truman era, has been misguided. But there you go. It
is. No, seriously, if you're entering a war without the determination to win the war, you are there to just feed it with troops and soldiers, which is exactly what's happening right now in Ukraine and Russia. Does Ukraine want to win the war? Absolutely. Do they want to repel Russia? Absolutely. Did they at one time have momentum on their side and were doing the ability to repel them? Yes, but repelling here is not enough. Russia will always be Russia.
Well, there is a war going on that we are fighting the Truman Doctrine, but Donald Trump wishes to go back even further. And that's the war with the cartels in Mexico. In 1916, we sent George Patton with the U.S. Army across the border because Pancho Villa and Mexican bandits were coming in from northern Mexico into the United States and attacking ranchers and farmers.
Yep, taking them.
We chased Villa around northern Mexico and sort of settled that problem. You may not have seen this in the news in Europe, but a cartel concentration camp was unearthed in Jalisco state. And what they found was a place with 300 bodies of people who had been disappeared by the cartels, who had been worked to death in factories as slave labor, and then their remains were tossed into crematoria and destroyed. This was a death factory run by the cartels under the noses of the Mexican government, with the connivance of the local police chief and political leaders. And, J.D. Vance, Pete Hegseth, the new Secretary of Defense, has been asked questions, will the United States military target the cartels in Mexico? And he's not answered that directly. But I think what we're being told is that we're being prepared for the fact that unless Mexico gets its act together, we're going to take action against the cartels and wipe them out, because we're losing 100,000 people a year to fentanyl.
Okay. However, are we going to enter the war to win the war? Now,
are we going to win the war, or are we just going to push the border a little farther south? I don't know.
Kevin, the capitalist business owner from here in the United States of America, only enters a game with the intent to win. Okay, my intent when I play poker once a month with my buddies, my intent is to have fun, to smell like cigar, have a lot of fun stories with my buddies, but in the end, it's to win. I want to be the guy who walks away from the poker table with dollar bills sticking out of my that sounds like a strip poker, with more money in my pockets than I left. And I frequently win, and that's just who I am. When I want to support a war, I don't support a continued fight. I support a victory. And the sooner the better, because it costs less lives.
And the Georges of America have to deal with the defeat. Some of you may know, who watched the show for a while, that I have a girl who's now 12, Emily, whose mother died of a fentanyl overdose 2 years ago. And she has no mother. She wasn't living with her father at the time. And we've had to, as a church, help rebuild a family, and among the poor working class in our community, rebuild a culture destroyed by narcotics.
Kevin and George, you just got yourself in trouble in the comments again, because everybody in the comment section's right, we're wrong. Let's move on and talk about, we got everything. Did we cover everything here in
5 and 6 we've got left? Yes, we covered everything in 4.
Let me have mercy. I'm going to check the time. 52 minutes. I didn't even think we'd have a half-hour show. Let's do this really quickly. Ecumenical group asks Vatican to rename the Feast of the Conversion of St. Paul to the Feast of the Vocation of St. Paul. Who chose who? That's a long-term question. When I came to faith, did I choose God or did God choose me? And that's the topic here, George.
I'm surprised this has not been picked up by some of the more Calvinistically inclined commentators out there.
Yeah.
But here we go. As many people know, the Lutherans and the Catholics have been talking for a long time about justification.
Right.
And the Catholics have accepted some justification by faith, and the Lutherans have sort of toned down some of the more explicit anti-Catholic, all you people are just works and whatnot. Well, one of the things that's come out of these dialogues is a joint request to the Catholic Church to rename the Feast of the Conversion of St. Paul to the Feast of the Vocation of St. Paul. Now, if in the Episcopal Church, we have that feast, the Conversion of St. Paul.
Right.
Now, why is this? Well, because the thinking is, did Paul choose to become a Christian, or did God choose Paul? If Paul chose, through a logical, experiential way, he had a choice whether to become a Christian or not to become a Christian, then that's a conversion.
Well, this is the Tulip Society. This is tulips right here.
But if God's plan was that Paul be a Christian, then Paul's becoming a Christian was not a conversion, but actually a vocation, a response to God's call on his life. And so the petition has been started by theologians, and some of them are now dead. Christopher Stendhal, the Lutheran bishop and Harvard professor, is one of them, saying we need to really be more clear in our language. Paul did not convert, where conversion has the understanding of a free will choice in the matter. Paul was preordained, predestined, and Paul lived into his confession. It lived into his vocation by accepting Jesus Christ as his Lord. So the question is, and now for some people, this is a real hot topic. For others, oh man, we have to reprint the bulletins that Sunday. But this is, I think, maybe some people would say this is what you should talk about on Anglican Unscripted.
This is a fun discussion. Who chose
meaty stuff.
Yeah.
But Kevin, what do you think? Is this just bored theologians, or is this really a teaching moment here?
Well, it's a teaching moment to understand the fathers of the church. What would Calvin have said? What's Calvin's opinion on this, George?
Calvin, if we asked him today, would say, of course it's a vocation. Mm-hmm. Luther, on the other hand, and here's one of the funny little things. Luther really thought this was a conversion because in Luther's mind, he saw Paul's journey akin to his journey, and Luther had a conversion where he chose his path in Luther's own mind. And so as we sort of cleaned up the calendar, moved it in the 17th, 18th, 19th, 20th century, it became the Feast of the Conversions. The Catholics picked up the Martin Luther terminology. It is argued in this paper, I don't have the history at my fingertips. And we Episcopalians in the early part of the 20th century, when we were filling out our calendar going, we should have a calendar too. Besides Indianapolis 500 day and Super Bowl Sunday, we need to add feasts to the church as well. Mm-hmm. We just copy the Catholic calendar on a lot of places. And so this is where we are.
And
we're having an anti-Luther move led by Lutherans and Catholics.
Yes.
And renaming a feast.
Which is a great topic that you guys can continue in the comment section. Who chose who? Did you choose God first, or did God choose you first? I remember my conversion experience and when I thought that I had chose to follow Christ. And I see that from my perception. When I see it from God's perception, I see it differently. And you're welcome to share your conversion experience too, or your walk into faith, whatever you want to call it. But in those discussions, tell us who chose who. And
I would say I don't think I ever had a conversion experience. I've only had a vocation experience, because I've known all my life that this is what God called me to do. And I am just seeking to live into what his plan for my life has been. And every time I've tried to pull away and say, oh, well, I want to be rich, I want to be famous, I want to do this, I want to do that. No, that's not what God calls me to do. He calls me to serve the people in this community as their pastor.
I had a conversation with a past ACNA archbishop, the first one, who said the same thing you did. I didn't have a conversion experience, Kevin. This is who I was always called to be. Like, wow, that's profound. Wait a minute, I had a conversion. You know, it's one of those dichotomies and paradoxes within the church. Please discuss in the comment section attached to the show. Last story.
Let me just little announcement. Tonight in my Lenten series, I'm starting a series on self-examination. Mm-hmm. And so we're going to, so this is part of it, self-examination. Are you a Catholic or are you a Puritan on this issue? And guess what? George is a Puritan on this issue.
Okay. George, we're at 58 minutes. I think we can skip the last story. It's a sad story until our next show. We need to start having mercy on our audience. What, you okay with that? Sure. Oh, yeah. Come on. I'm Kevin Kallsen.
And I'm George Conger. And you've been watching episode 905 of Anglican Unscripted.